We're joined at the NCSL Legislative Summit by John Engler, former three-term governor of Michigan, president of the Business Roundtable, an association of chief executive officers of leading U.S. corporations with a combined workforce of more than 14 million workers and over $6 trillion in annual revenues. He moderated a summit session on the business of creating jobs. Welcome, Governor.
Well, thank you very much. Great to be with you. And my most important credential, 20 years in state legislature in Michigan.
What is the single most important area in which government, either state or federal, should invest to help businesses create more jobs?
I think we heard from CEOs, Doug Oberhelman from Caterpillar, Ed Rust from State Farm, that education, that investment, which is for most states still either their single largest expenditure or very close to it, is the one that really can make a difference. We need in this country to have the best skills, the smartest engineers, the most highly trained workforce that we can have. You can't do that with dropout rates in urban centers that are in some cases 30, 40, 50%. You can't do it if rural kids don't stay in school. You can't do it if the ones who stay in school don't get a quality education, if they're not literate, if they can't compute. And so getting a return on that annual $650 billion investment that we make as a nation, and nearly all of it overseen by states and certainly local communities, is the primary payoff. We mentioned there are 3 million jobs today in America that could be filled if people had the right skills. And we're going to fill some of the jobs, I suppose, through stronger immigration policies, but at the same time, we need to look around our neighborhoods and our communities and say, wait a minute, we've got young people here, we've got not so old people that could do these jobs if they could get the right skills. So getting that right is a differentiator, I believe. I've always said state with the best schools wins. I still think that's true.
Now, some of the things they talked about today was not necessarily education and higher education, but it was high school and immediately after high school.
Well, that's right. It's the complex nature of work today is such that the basic job, if somebody just showed up and worked hard, did physical labor, those kind of jobs are few and far between. Even in sectors like construction today, there's a lot of technology involved, and you're using materials, you're using processes today that are quite sophisticated. If you move to a manufacturing facility, it's highly sophisticated. The tolerances are virtually non-existent. The quality is, everything has to be perfect. You can't have error rates. So it's how you do this kind of work today. And so you have to have an aptitude, you have to be prepared for that. The technology that you're operating maybe is technology that automated a process that years ago was done manually with a lot of people. Today it's being done by a robot, but somebody has to build the robot, somebody has to maintain the robot, somebody has to program the robot. All of those are high skills.
Is there one piece of tax reform that would have the most effect on job creation?
I think there are a couple of things that need to be done, although interestingly, more of those are at the national level than at the state level. There are some states, I think, because they have very high tax burdens and high risk of higher tax burdens, maybe to pay for pensions that are unfunded, for health care costs that haven't been paid for. So they've got some risk factors in certain states. But if you go to the national level, we've got a corporate tax rate today which has gone from 1986, where we were really competitive when it was lowered as part of a comprehensive tax reform, to the point that 25 years later it hasn't been modernized at all. It's now the highest corporate tax rate in the world, and we've got a very inequitable system today. We've got companies that are very global in nature. They make a lot of money in other parts of the world. We want them to bring that money back home. We have the worst system in the world that would encourage that. You try to bring it home from someplace else, you're going to pay even more taxes when you get here. You don't do that if you're a German company, a Chinese company, a British company. So that's called territorial or tax on foreign earnings, but you got to fix that along with the corporate tax rate. That's probably the one that matters the most. And I think there are ways to do this and at the same time be positive in terms of economic growth for the country and contribution to deficit reduction in Washington.
As a former governor in the state legislature, what would you recommend to your colleagues do in the state to strengthen their economies?
Well, again, I'd certainly rely on education, but I'd also be looking at how do I get that balance sheet strengthened? How do I make sure that there's no ticking time bomb in some part of the balance sheet? We're simply going to have to, in this time of emphasis on debt, make sure that everybody's very, very creditworthy. And so you can't hide a problem. You can't look the other way and leave it for the next person. So it's getting that stuff done. I also happen to think that smart strategies relative to infrastructure are going to be increasingly important, because I do think in the country we've underinvested in our own infrastructure for some time, and we're going to have to start figuring out how to catch that up. There's a role, I believe, there for the national government as well as the states, and it's very hard for the states to do this all by themselves, but at the same time, the states are in a position to do some very creative things. We've seen governors like Mitch Daniels in Indiana figure out a way literally to upgrade the entire state road system. That's going to pay big dividends, if not during the time Governor Daniels is in office. It'll be in subsequent years with other governors who will benefit from that far-sighted approach.
Given the TARP money's effect on the auto industry, did that government action save the so-called Rust Belt states?
What saved them is the bankruptcy, sadly. I mean, the bankruptcy required then very hard decisions get made. Literally thousands of jobs were lost. I mean, there was great dramatic right-sizing going on where excess capacity was wrung out. Very hard on some of the dealers. Dealers lost their franchises, and so you had this whole realignment in the industry. The TARP money came, at the end of the Bush years, at the beginning of the Obama years. There was a credit crisis, a liquidity lock that just nobody had capital available, and so yes, that was very important. But ultimately, that wouldn't have been enough. It took the bankruptcy, and the debate is about how quickly bankruptcy could have occurred. Did bankruptcy occur in the right way? Those are good political questions. But now I think the industry, whether it's saved or not, may depend on a regulatory perspective. I mean, we can't, even though I'm talking to state legislators while I participate in the annual meeting, I'm not one who believes that big national and global industries ought to be regulated differently state by state. So California's got budget problems, needs to get out of that business. Let Washington do it, and let's have one standard for the nation, and then let's have US-based companies go out and be able to compete globally.
What's the future of manufacturing in America?
Oh, I think it's pretty good. I think that there remains in the U.S. tremendous know-how. We remain the largest manufacturing nation in the world. Now, clearly, China looms out there, more than 3 times our size. Eventually, likely they'll pass us. But for now, our manufacturing output, and before the Great Recession that we've been trying to emerge from, we were at an all-time high in terms of the value of manufactured products made in this country. So we've got the expertise. We saw it recently with the landing of the Mars, I guess we can't call it a lunar module, but the Mars module, the little vehicle dropped on the surface of Mars, transmitting pictures back to the Earth. Amazing feat of technology. And to think about being able to do that, we've got very clever, very talented engineers and scientists and researchers here, but we need to keep that pipeline chock full of people and talent, and we need not only to have our best talent developed in this country, we ought to increase our ability to be a magnet to draw talent from around the world to come here. We have to allow for innovators to make a return on those investments, for the investors to take a risk and achieve a reward. I mean, some of the things that this country was very, very good at for a very long time, we've kind of gotten away from some of that. We've taken our eye off the ball. We've probably gotten a little interventionist with the government, and the last thing you need is some bureaucrat in Washington trying to pick the technology that's going to win. If they were so smart, they'd be out there doing it. And so let's let that system work, and let's remember what made this country such a manufacturing and powerhouse. And it wasn't just our ability to make, it was also our ability to innovate.
How much does uncertainty over what many call the fiscal cliff keep businesses from hiring, expanding, making big investments, and are businesses conveying that uncertainty to Congress?
Absolutely, every day. I think it's a big drag. I think it's a bigger drag than has actually been understood. When you've got some of the most talented people in the country, like Diane Swant, coming to your NCSL meeting, and you have her talking about the implications of this fiscal cliff, I mean, that gives you a perspective from a technically trained economist who's very savvy about how things work. But I hear it just from people running companies say, look, we don't know what the tax rates are, we don't know what the energy policy is, we don't know if the budget or debt policy is going to get resolved, we don't know if we're in the defense sector, what sequestration means. We just can't answer about every question that matters to the future of our enterprise. So of course we're going to be cautious. We're going to stockpile cash and resources and hunker down a little bit here and let's see what happens. And I think with the world economy as weak as it is, with Europe in a bit of crisis that seems to be very much an ongoing, albeit maybe getting a little bit better crisis, that's concerning. India's kind of been moving sideways. China's been a little slower than expected. There's a lot of opportunity for the U.S. to step up. But to do that, we've got to make fundamental basic decisions about our future. And that includes how much we're going to spend, how we're going to repay the money we've already spent that we borrowed, how are we going to finance entitlements in the future, which are going to grow larger and will be unsustainable if not curbed in some fashion. So we've got hard decisions awaiting whoever gets elected president and whoever's going to serve in the Congress. I think 2013 is going to be one of the most important congressional sessions we've had in a long, long time, because we really, at least from the standpoint of business, think we've reached that decision point. We can't just keep putting this off, kicking the can. And as I said a few weeks back, I said, we're not kicking cans, we're kicking 55-gallon drums down the road. Now it's getting a little harder to do that.
You can't do a Google search on John Engler without the phrase "be bold" appearing in a lot of places. Is the lack of political boldness hampering the economy?
I think so. I think that the inability, I think leadership requires putting together a plan, putting the marker down, saying, look, this is the way we go. That isn't always going to please everybody, but at least it gives everybody then something to react to. And it requires that you come up with an alternative. If you don't like this idea, give me the better idea. You can't sit back, and we shouldn't allow people to sit back and say, well, I don't like that one, you come up with another one. If you're in the process, the obligation is to respond, but you don't have to respond if the leadership isn't there that forces the response. So we've got a lot of talk and way too little action. And I think that the campaign, I hope, for the presidency will bring some of this forward. But more importantly, once this is settled, that we take advantage of the opportunity that we need to take advantage of for the future of our country. I think it's that serious. I just think that we have such remarkable opportunities in front of us if we seize them. And I think that there's an inherent strength in this country, in the people that are here, in our system, if we can get us back on track. We're off track right now.
States are very competitive with each other for jobs and
Yes,
getting plants to relocate. What do you think businesses are most looking for when they make that decision of X or Y or Z?
I think I do think it comes down increasingly to people, because as we had some of the CEOs tell the NCSL assembly, look, everybody's kind of able to do about the same thing when it comes to taxes and somewhat on regulation. I mean, there can be a difference, and it depends exactly on the kind of business, because if somebody's got, say, thousands of employees, somebody's got fewer employees but millions of investment, then a tax on labor, say through a very uncompetitive workers' compensation system, may not matter to the latter company like it does to the first company in my little example. So some of those things will vary. But you've got to be able to recruit your talent. And so there's a reason that some of the high-tech companies in this nation located where they did or expanded where they did. There's a reason usually why things happen, and you need to look at that. And I always think that whenever a decision's made, you ought to be examining that, and I think the good states do that. They look and say, how come X made the decision to go to that location? And if you scratch deep enough, you'll usually find out what those factors are. And I think the other thing that states have to do is to decide and understand what they're really good at. It's very hard, even for a big state, to be good at everything. There's going to be some resources, some assets they've got that are stronger than others. And I've always believed you work from strength. And if you do that, you're going to have success. And as you have success, then maybe you're going to bring other parts up as well.
You mentioned infrastructure. The people at the panel also mentioned infrastructure. Do you think businesses would accept higher taxes in exchange for more infrastructure? Should they?
I think they would, and in many cases, much more readily than the lawmakers who have to vote for the taxes. But I think that a lot of that has to deal with fairness, that if you tell people if users are going to pay for something, people kind of get that, and that doesn't necessarily cause a reflexive no. I, as a governor, supported and was successful in passing through the legislature a hike in gas taxes, and we had our success that time by being very clear with people what this was going to buy. I think today there's so much cynicism about government that it's very hard to go out and just have a general tax increase, a general increase in revenues, and say, trust us, we'll do the right thing. They don't trust so much now. So I think you're going to have to, in some cases, say, okay, this is what we're asking, and if we receive this, this is what we'll do. Now, the other part is you better do it.
You've expressed some concerns about term limits. What's your view on term limits?
Well, I think that, I watched term limits be implemented in the state of Michigan. They came as a result of an initiative petition, which put it on the ballot. People voted for it. What that's done is remove from the legislature senior members, and by this I mean senior members who've served a longer period of time, who really have mastery over the complexities of school aid financing formulas, or how the Medicaid system, which is a very intricate federal state funding scheme as well as policy program, how welfare public assistance works, how you finance your highways, what you're doing with your prison system. All of these today are very complex, very costly components of your state budget. Very difficult, I think, if somebody's only going to spend 6 years in the House of Representatives to come in and to be right up to speed and to have any institutional memory. And so you see mistakes that were made being repeated because nobody is around to remember that was the first time, and the second time the wrong way to go, and so they're back at it for a third time. The other thing I think is that if you're going to have an ability to go out and maybe persuade the public that we're going to have to change our direction here, it's helpful for somebody to really understand the case they're making. And I think that's going to get harder and harder. The other thing that hasn't happened with term limits is that some said, well, don't worry, you'll get a very professional staff then that will support the legislative body. Instead, that's gone the wrong direction as well, because somebody's there for a short period of time. They almost inevitably were bringing somebody along who worked with them in the campaign. Well, why don't you come with me for 2, 3, terms? And so you get inexperience building on other inexperience. One thing that hasn't changed, though, is that anytime somebody's in these processes, they seem to want to stay around. And so the people that are hanging around the legislative process or hoping to be in government somewhere, that number grows exponentially. And so you have many more seekers, and actually that increases vulnerability. That doesn't increase independence, it increases vulnerability on the part of people. And so I think it hasn't worked. I'm prepared to say it's a failed experiment. Now, I suppose you could say, well, instead of unlimited, I just talked to a good friend from that was in the Senate when I was in the state Senate, and we did a lot of things together at NCSL, and he's retiring after more than 4 decades, and I think he's still a good legislator. But if somebody's, well, I'm just opposed in principle, somebody's staying that long, maybe there's a way to have something that's more reasonable. But 6 years or 8 years is not reasonable if you're talking about a House or a Senate body. I think it has to be a little longer.
Thank you.